Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Perceptive podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. We have another developer interview lined up for this week's chat. We're going to be talking with the developers from Made Up Games, who are working on the game Pine, A Story of Loss. This is one of the games we covered from Ludo Narracon, and they're on to kind of talk about the development of the game and seeing other conversations that come by. So, I will give them a chance to introduce themselves. So, guys, feel free.
Let me go first.
I'll go first. My name is Tom Booth. I'm primarily an illustrator and new to animation animator, and occasional author of children's books. And this is the first real, proper game that I've made with my co-founder Najati. I'm originally from outside Philadelphia, and I'm currently living in Portland, Maine, and looking forward to making more games in the future.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Najati Imam. Career-long developer. Started out like web consulting sort of stuff, and then a number of years ago met Tom while looking for somebody to make games with, and we've been doing that ever since.
Nice. It is great to chat with both of you. And as I always say to developers watching, if you are interested in coming on to talk about your games or chatting about game dev, please reach out. I am always looking for guests. So, to get things started with, for both of you, can you tell the audience what is Pine about? Like, what's kind of like the elevator pitch for it?
Pine is very much a game about grief, and not grief within the context of a larger story, but grief as a story. It's a wordless game designed to be accessible, and it's also designed to reflect the grieving process, not in maybe a scientific way, but in terms of our interpretation of what that experience is. And it is focused on a woodworker who has lost, the love of his life, and he's going through that grieving process. And the reason we made it as a game is because video games, unlike other media, utilize agency and choice throughout. And when you're in the grieving process, even small choices can be big. So it's an attempt to tell the woodworker's story while also getting the player to maybe be a part of moving the character forward. And if it's something that they are also experiencing, then perhaps moving them forward as well.
Yeah, I think that pretty well covers it. Just to echo one of the things Tom touched on, like it's very much the topic of grief is kind of the basis for the whole game, and often in stories and movies or whatever, grief is sort of like a vehicle that's used like as one element in the story. Like there's some story, a thing happens, they grieve that like real quick compared to how long it actually takes, and then like you get to see like all of the everything. Oh, they've grieved, now there's the last third of the story, the third act. With Pine, it really is about sort of giving that experience time in sort of a realistic way, again echoing what Tom said, sort of to like validate anybody who's going through that. It's sort of like and depending on what you're watching, if you're grieving, you're like you might have the impression that, oh, that character just got through it like no problem, like, what's wrong with me taking so long to get over my ex-girlfriend or get over my lost cat or something like that. Pine is really intended to sort of validate the time it takes to grieve for anybody who's going through it.
And but from Ludo Narracon, again, I played certainly a lot of very different games. And I did play a lot of games that dealing with grief and depression as well. It is a very, it's a sad, but it's a very rich topic to kind of explore from a game design and a storytelling point of view. How long have the two of you been working on Pine for?
It's a good question. I mean, I think formally a little over 3 years. I would say. If Najati, feel free to correct me there.
I think the development in earnest has been going on for a little over 3 years at this point, but like the topic itself has been kicking around for a bit longer.
Yeah. So the concept came to me during a difficult period of my life, and I have been a lifelong doodler, an illustrator, all of the above, and have always processed anything that happens in my life with drawing. And so, you know, some of the work that I sometimes do is character design. And so I designed a character, and the character was this woodworker who was creating uh, carvings as a way of, you know, not forgetting the person that he lost. It was sort of these artifacts that carried a great deal of significance to him, and it was really kind of just a way for me to process. And there was a pretty significant response online on social media. People started getting tattoos of the drawings, which was pretty wild. And so Najati and I had been talking about how we might collaborate on something, and it just so happened that the idea resonated with him as well, because in life none of us really ever get a free ride. We all experience loss in some form at some point. And so he, I think, saw the opportunity to really do something special with the story. Again, to maybe not make it as a book or like a short animated film where the viewer's part in that is a little bit more passive, and we saw a significant challenge, but also a lot of reasons to get excited about making it a story that you could play. And so it started from personal experience, and in many ways that actually made development quite difficult, because when you're working with a topic that is so close to home, it's a double-edged sword. People tend to respond to personal work more than something that's more commercial. At the same time, it's personal to you, and it can often feel like an exposed nerve or like an anchor. So it's this added component to the development process that makes the development of the game, I think, a little bit more challenging. Again, we're kind of relatively new to it, but I think if you're making a game or you're making a book or you're making anything, when it's personal, it's potentially powerful, but it's also kind of painful. So, you know, so that was sort of, I guess, the origin of it. And I just was feeling very lucky that Nishati, saw it, understood it right off the bat, and kind of, I think we were both on the same page about what we could do with it. That, of course, evolved over time, but I think we've been good about staying true to what we originally set out to do.
Mm. So on the like more on the timeline side, I did a quick search in my Gmail account, and the first like draft of the story as just a vague story idea, not even like for a game. That email's from February 26th, 2019. Which is, I think, even a few months after you had been publishing the drawings on Instagram. Uh, so from like February to March of 2020, Tom and I built another game just to sort of practice making games together. It's a little free cell game that's free on iOS and Android. If anybody's a fan of free cell, highly recommend it. And then I remember it was my 40th birthday in March of 2020. Or no, maybe I'm off by a year. No, it was that we were talking to a friend of ours, and when we were talking about what to do next, and he was like, just do Pine, like just do Pine, because we'd been kicking around the idea for a while. So that was March 2020. We started working on like the concept of what it would be like, and simultaneously started working on the Kickstarter. And so we basically spent a year doing a prototype of the game and putting the Kickstarter together. The Kickstarter went live a year later, 2021, I think. And then development like kicked back up full steam on the game later that year in 2021. So like May 2021 was when the repo starts getting active again after doing all of like the Kickstarter and the post Kickstarter logistics. We originally thought it was going to be like a year and a half project, as is pretty common for first time indie and Kickstarter games. And then part of the way through that process, we started getting interest from publishers and, kind of got the sense that we would be able to make it a little bit bigger. But that also meant making it a little, like dev taking longer. And there was also just for like the game developers listening, like there was a solid year of like us being like, aha, this is what the thing is. And we would make that thing. And then it would be like, no, this isn't what the thing is. And we would like have to pivot a little bit. So there was like a pretty decent amount of trying to make the thing that we thought it was going to be, making it, learning what was good about that approach, being like, and then like learning what like wasn't so great about that approach. It was much more linear. It's still a pretty linear story. There's not a whole lot in terms of like branching paths or anything like that. There's not a whole lot of that in it, but the way that we feel like we were able to incorporate agency through gameplay into it was something that was very much developed in the process of developing the game. And of course, there were like points where we overstepped and made it too much like a Monkey Island or something like that, and had to pull back because we were getting too far away from the thing that we thought was best for the story. So after like a year and a half of kind of like finding it, we felt like we really understood what it was, and then basically the year and a half since has been like really just figuring out the last like puzzles within that last pieces within that puzzle we established for ourselves, and just a whole bunch of production, animation, working with the musician or with our composer and sound effects guy and all that sort of stuff. So, and like Tom had a baby and I had a baby and I moved and Tom moved and Tom got flooded out of his apartment. And yeah, so there's
I got flooded out of my home. I had to move 7 times in a year. Like it was
lots of life packed into that 3+ years.
For anyone watching, if you haven't checked your pipes recently in your house and you live in a cold climate, check your pipes.
Make sure they're insulated.
There you go, everyone.
Yeah.
A lot of good points between the two of you. And yeah, if I had a nickel every time I heard a developer say, "Yeah, I only thought the project take like 6 months, a year, and it would be done and over," I would have a whole lot of nickels right about now. I guess before we kind of get to some design questions, one I just wanted to clarify for the people listening / watching. So, Tom, did you do like all like the animation and the artwork for Pine?
I did a lot of it. I would probably argue that I did the majority of it. And at a certain point, Najati and I realized that given the fact that we were getting more support from our publisher, that we had an opportunity to kind of take the game to another level. And with that, we brought on some very talented animators, and they've been crucial to the game's look and feel. They're kind of, we brought them on in the last year. I mean, I feel like I should know this, Najati, but when we brought them on exactly is a little difficult for me to remember. I'm very sleep deprived, everyone, so I apologize. But yeah, so to answer your question, we have a small team of animators who we've brought on to handle mostly just character animation. World art has been done by me, and I would argue Najati as well, because at a certain point in the game's development, we moved away from a much more two-dimensional approach to an approach that had a 3D world with two-dimensional characters within it, which was a pretty big pivot, but a worthwhile one. And that just involved a lot of painting and developing of what that 3D world would look like. So To answer your question, we have had help from some young and talented animators, and we're looking forward to singing their praises in the credits, and as the game gets closer to release. But for a little while there, it was kind of Najati and myself, especially in the early concept stages, just the two of us kind of ironing stuff out.
Yeah. I just looked up another first email. Our first email with Andres, who is our primary animator, was from March 2022. So that was over 2 years ago that we've been working with Andres.
Yeah, so significant. Yeah.
Yeah, the look and feel of the characters and the world is all pretty much Tom's hand and Tom's eye. We've had a lot of help with animation and tweens and coloring from our small but dedicated army of animators and artists. So,
all right. And I guess it's another question for the art style for Pine. Is this something that, during, the original, concept or coming up with the game, is something that you settled on very early, or did it, evolve over the course of development?
It definitely evolved. The tricky part is that my experience coming into this is as an illustrator, and so especially with the images that I created, those early concept illustrations for the character are far more rendered than what you're probably going to find in what you will find in game, and that's simply because those are single images that I've had time to develop. And
just for the non-illustrator audience watching, rendered in this case means more detail in the line work and much more it doesn't not 3D rendered. It just means more detailed drawing, right?
Right, more developed, more and even more stylized, I would argue. Some of the earlier sketches were, there wasn't that added pressure to create designs that would allow for movement and that kind of thing. It was just very much a static image. So for the game, we had to face the fact that we didn't have a very large team of artists helping us at the start, and we had to sort of ask ourselves some pretty harsh questions about what was realistic. We wanted Pine to be a game that would be attractive, and it is wordless, so it relies very heavily on the visuals and the sound, but we were also very, very small, so to work around that, or at least to work with that, we ended up embracing a style where the world had more of a painterly quality to it, but the characters themselves are intentionally very flat. The primary reason being is that we wanted the characters to be visible at all times. We wanted to make sure that if the camera cuts, you don't have to go looking for where the character might be. You would know exactly where they are right away, especially if they're far away. And that was actually something that Najati would help with also later in development, where he figured out how to simplify the characters' designs, which were already pretty simple, but to take them one step further in terms of simplifying them so that they would pop off of the backgrounds. And so that was something that I think it was difficult to figure out kind of throughout development, because you would find some shots that would look great, and then you would find others where you're like, oh, this isn't maybe working quite as well. So you're kind of constantly working on what that aesthetic is throughout the whole process.
All right. Yeah. And to kind of start talking more about the gameplay of Pine, kind of bring this all together. One thing I wanted to kind of elaborate on, or kind of go back to that you were talking about earlier, Tom, in terms of kind of your background as an illustrator and doing books versus making a video game. And I want to get both of your thoughts on kind of what was kind of the challenge. You mentioned a little bit about trying to keep the balance between telling the story but still making a gripping or an engaging game. Because again, obviously for everyone listening to us, a video game and a book or movie or a TV show are very different mediums in terms of how the audience approaches it. And especially when you're dealing with a topic like grief, and this is something that I think I've talked with other developers about, kind of the challenge when you're talking about a heavy or very emotionally draining topic, it can be sometimes hard to kind of balance that with the fact that the player has to interact with it. And for both of you, what was it kind of like trying to strive for that balance with Pine?
Najati, why don't you go first?
Sure. I don't know. It's almost the way I want to answer this. Our publisher has said, "Don't say that." So I'll paraphrase it and say that, like, um, like a lot of experiences or a lot of games that try to address this topic approach it sort of from the game direction, and I think we approached it very much from I don't want to say art piece or but like it's very much about the experience first with Pine, and the gameplay is there to make that more engaging. So there are parts where it feels like an animated short, and there are a large part of the interactions is to like interrupt myself very slightly. One of the very early ideas we had about the game, in one of those ideas, it felt much more like a storybook. Like there was like a literal frame of the page on the screen, and there would be like a page turning mechanic, and you would sort of like almost swipe your way through the story. So you were sort of like almost reading like a digital like comic book and like a DC or Marvel like comic book reader. And we moved away from that idea for a number of reasons. But one of the things we ended up with are these, if you've seen the trailer or played the demo, there are the gestures that sort of like let you do the chore that the woodworker is doing, and choose which one he's going to do, or actually perform the action. And we realized after the fact that those kind of took the place of the page turn in a way, but in a way that makes it feel like a lot more direct. But it's not like you're pressing left and then you're jumping and then you walk up to the thing and you hold the interact button. It's like it's much more quick timey in a way. So the gameplay is in there to make the storytelling more direct, to sort of like bring you into the storytelling. In terms of like I chuckle because you said like, how do you balance that? And like I was chuckling, I was like, we don't really balance it. Like it's we make sure that the story has time to breathe, and like if we want our character to be like laboring his way through something, like you kind of have to labor through that with him, and we rely on the environment, like the beautiful environments and the beautiful environmental sound effects and the beautiful music when it comes along, and sort of like the story that you're in the middle of. Like often in Pine, you're coming out of a memory and you've just witnessed the woodworker missing his wife, and you need time, like he needs time to process those things as they happen. So we build that time into Pine. So we in at some points the game might feel a little bit unbalanced, for lack of a better word, but I would say all of the time it's pretty intentional, and it's like you're sort of signing up for a slow, thoughtful experience when you decide to play Pine. And the hope is that the richness of the environment and the world and the story and the characters sort of rewards the time that you commit to spending with them. I think I might have answered the question.
Yeah, I would just add that we talked a lot about tedium and how that was going to be a very intentional aspect of the experience, because true to life, look, I would have loved if during my grieving process there would have been a helpful little animated friend who would pop up and be like, Start collecting these coins
Yeah.
because it'll get
Or
you
like
out of
a
that funk that you're in, and like
yeah,
that
or like
shit
a
is not.
skippable cutscene. Like grief is not a
Yeah,
skippable
it's like,
cutscene.
wow, this is really painful. Let's like cut forward to when the character has a full
Mhm.
beard, and that wasn't how it felt, and
Mhm.
like and that was a huge aspect of it. It's like, what does the grieving process feel like? And so much of it is this sort of dragging aspect. It's like people often say that the only thing that can kind of get you through something like that is time. So we didn't want to skip over the time that it would take to work your way through it. And the challenge that then presented is how can we kind of keep the player engaged, and kind of set up these little sort of emotional milestones where there is a love story here, and it's a bit buried,
Mhm.
but it's almost like that's your reward. It's a weird way to phrase it because that wasn't really how we thought of them,
Mm,
but it's kind of maybe what the player might think or feel when they do get to those spots. Um, but to kind of just go back to the question you asked, it's like, in any other kind of storytelling, you would have a start and then a finish, and it's a pretty straight line between them.
Mhm.
And how could we kind of create that illusion of choice, and that feeling of agency, um, enough of it so that the player hopefully feels as though they are more directly tied to the main character, and kind of making the choices that are helping the character kind of get to the ending. um, and that took a while. I think that took a while for us to kind of figure out
yeah.
the balance, and to make sure that no matter what direction you took, that you would encounter those little quote unquote rewards roughly the same times,
Mm,
so that you wouldn't hit a spot where like you've been sitting in the
Mhm.
tedium for too long, and then you're struggling as a player. So
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, just another a quick note on that is just the notion of like not being able to lose the game. Like there
Yeah.
are, um, there are, for lack of a better word, mini games that come up in the memories with his wife. There are a couple of those mini games that, um, you might have to like spend a little bit of time figuring out. But all of them are meant to be pretty accessible, and most of them like are basically impossible to lose. Like you can't get stuck,
Mhm.
and so like making sure, and that was a design goal, uh, uh, or that was part of the accessibility to design goal, just to make sure that whoever was playing, because it really is meant to be. It's kind of like it's a game that's intended to be enjoyable
Mhm.
by any like level of skill gamer, but also by like my mom who like played some Tetris in the 90s, but other than that like hasn't played a lot of video games, or sort of anybody who like has the facility to do something on an iPad should be able to make their way through Pine. So anybody who would want, like, anybody who might be interested in the story should be able to enjoy it, or at least experience it for.
Mhm. Yeah. And trying to settle on kind of like the gameplay interactions, I think, is another very interesting point about a game like this. So, from the time I spent with the demo, I did have a
Mhm.
chance to see both like kind of the puzzle you had, as well as kind of again like the more like I guess we consider them like quick time events with or like
Yeah.
the emotion controls or
Mhm.
setting up the motion
Yep.
gestures
For sure.
with kind of like getting like the gestures down or like as you were talking about like the tedium of
Mhm.
working through like this process. It's always tricky with a lot of video games when they have kind of like these like attentional points that are supposed to be like very slow or very methodical like this. And again, like if you're playing a game like Pine, obviously you're not the same audience as someone who's playing a game like Dark Souls or a very reflex driven title.
Mhm.
With settling on the gestures and kind of like getting that tedium down, how did like the two of you and the team kind of like settle on, I guess, like how much you wanted this like I guess like bring the game to like a slower pace without kind of like upsetting like the flow of everything else around it?
I mean, the right amount of that was really only apparent once the game started coming together and we were able to play it. We the I don't remember. I think I get to take credit or blame for like the gesture idea.
Credit.
And did like a couple quick proofs of concept for it, and I was like, all right, this seems like it's pretty reasonable. And we started sort of building a skeleton, like the skeleton that we had of the game. We started putting those things in place in like the kind of storyboarded version of the game. Um, and there were definitely some points where I was like, all right, this is too many. Like, you don't need to tap to open the door, and, like, or like tap, tap, tap to take a step or whatever. We never did that. But, like, that would have been very obviously too much. But then there were times where it was like, oh, like, you get sort of in the rhythm of doing the chores, kind of like he would get in the rhythm of doing the chores. And the rhythm of doing the chores is kind of an important thing because it's those interruptions to the rhythm that we sort of take advantage of when his routine is interrupted by a memory. So like we just tried to like pay attention to our own playing it, and when our friends would play it, like sort of where they would expect to be, um and then like play with that level of expectation. Like if you wanted to slow it down, have a few more, or if you've been through something enough times, you have a few less. But it was very much kind of like you have to like play it to see where you are in the balance.
Yeah, and I'd also say that from a storytelling perspective, we're dealing with a character who is pretty low, right? So um, something that might seem simple, especially like a gesture is just that. It's a gesture. It's not gonna require a ton of dexterity. It's not going to require a ton of experience necessarily, but just the very fact of kind of like he's doing a chore, and the simple act of doing it is kind of a big deal for him because it's hard. It's not, he's in a tough spot. So I think the very fact that the player can kind of choose when that happens, they can choose to sit, or they can kind of power through those things. It allows the player to maybe project a little bit onto the character and to sort of have a sense of like where the character is mentally and emotionally. So I think Najati explained it best, that it was an effective way for us to kind of capture that feeling of agency with very simple things. And then I think just also the number of the gesture puzzles, like over time, I think has an effect. It kind of has a character who is making progress. It may not seem significant, but you are working your way through the story by completing these small tasks. And I think it's that aspect of the game that I think I would have found valuable when I was a little bit deeper in my tough spot, where it's like I'm not being forced to do something here. It's very much up to me when and how I kind of proceed. I'm also not being punished, for not doing something exceptionally well, because that was very much something that we wanted to avoid. We didn't want players to feel like they were bad at the
Yeah,
game. It
you
was it
can't
was
lose.
yeah, like it's a difficult enough topic to begin with. So how can you make sure that you're not making it more difficult for the player there?
Yep. And again, like with like a very story driven, very like emotionally driven game, you do have to approach it differently than a game that is being aimed more for like a hardcore audience, or one that's going to be more of a reflex driven experience.
Mhm.
And speaking of that, in terms of kind of like the length of a game, I know from the story page you're aiming this to be kind of a short form title. And again, with like a story like this, it's not something that I could see like someone wanting to spend like 10 to 20 hours. Like, would you like to experience grief and depression for 20 hours? Come play our game.
Yeah.
In terms
Yeah,
of like,
that's what Dark Souls is for.
true, yes. With like creating like the pacing for Pine, as we've said, it is trying to balance around grief, around kind of working through this with the tedium, but still trying to be more on the short form side. Again, like obviously, you don't have to spoil like how long the game's actually going to be or stuff like that here, but in terms of kind of figuring out like how much you wanted to put into a game like this, how did the two of you kind of decide on like that aspect of Pine?
Go on.
Go ahead, Najati.
I mean, I think. I mean, we kind of put ourselves in the shoes of somebody who like might want to watch a movie about the topic. And it didn't like. Is this like a single episode of a sitcom that felt too short? Is this like a 4-part miniseries that spans like 6 hours? Like that feels like too long. And also like the story itself is, it's a fairly straightforward telling of the topic. Like it doesn't go like sprawling, and there's not like a B narrative, and there's not like supporting characters, and there's not like a big plot twist that unravels and then has to wind up. It's like a fairly straightforward, like, this is what happened to this character, and like this was his experience of going through it. And like a movie felt like was sort of like where we're like, if we can get to like a decent movie length experience, that sort of felt like the right amount of time to spend with the character. So like, I mean, we're like sort of in that neighborhood at like, like you might be able to get through it in like, I don't even know what the average length of a movie is these days, but like roundabout 2 hours, like you can get through it quicker if you just like as fast as possible, and if you like approach it slower, it'll be a little bit longer. But like how long, it's when you start playing it, you'll sort of get a sense of how the story is structured. So like how long the game isn't going to be like any big secret, and it kind of doesn't. I don't think it spoils. I hope it doesn't spoil too much because I just said it. Yeah. So
I think also just this idea, going back to the idea of like hoping that if we've done our jobs somewhat well, that the player will feel like they've gotten to the other side of something. So even something simple, but on a difficult topic. I think if it were to be too short, then maybe you wouldn't feel like we had captured that sense of time so much. And that really is, it's a big part of the design. It's like something that we continue to ask our publisher when they were taking us on, being like, are you guys sure you're aware of that aspect of the game? And they've always been very encouraging of it, because I think I don't know, but maybe they've had a experience with loss, and they know that that's really the only way to kind of get to the other side is to spend time in that spot. So I think we wanted to be very respectful of that part, but also not take advantage of the players' patience, let's say.
And I think that also goes with kind of, as you're describing earlier, with like the use of like the mini games and like those kinds of tasks, that you didn't want this to be kind of like too like overwhelming or too involved to kind of like distract from the actual like story and kind of like the emotion that you wanted to tell with it.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm proud of in terms of what we ultimately got to is we wanted these mini games, which are part of memories. They're a significant piece of them. But I think Najati and I wanted those to be long enough that you maybe hopefully forget how it sort of began, much like a real life memory. When you're remembering something, it's not always clear how the memory, like what triggers it, and how you kind of fall into that. And then equally so, how you get pulled out of it. And I think, I personally think that we've succeeded in that, and that's something I think I'm pretty proud of, is that the player will witness the love story. They will be sort of hopefully uplifted by it, because it is such a contrast to what the majority of the game is.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden to have it kind of yanked away from them, and sort of forcing you back to the tedium, is really kind of, I think, Najati and I kind of staying true to what we were setting out to do, because that felt close to the real life experience of, like, how it's kind of like a drug. A memory can really kind of
Mhm.
make everything go away, and everything's fine again, but it doesn't last. So
You can't
yeah,
live in them.
right.
Yeah. Is there anything else regarding the development of Pine that we didn't touch on? I guess how about like the music, like trying to like figure out what the score you wanted for Pine? Anything that the two you can talk about in terms of that?
Yeah, sure. End up becoming very good friends with an extremely talented composer and just have him take care of it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was still living in Brooklyn, I befriended Tyler Gilmore, who produces under the name Blank Forms. And his uh his sonic palette kind of lended itself perfectly to the game. He's uh classically trained and extremely talented, and in addition to that, and being an accomplished uh, a pianist, he is also an experimental, excuse me, um, electronic musician that works a lot with like very deconstructed and textural sounds.
Mhm.
So his ability to sort of blend the kind of like bright, clear, like more classical or chamber music stuff with the more deconstructed, noisy stuff was like, couldn't have imagined like a better fit for what Pine needed in terms of music. Yeah. So
And I would also just want to add that, and I think this is a credit to Tyler and Najati, just how and when music plays a part.
Mhm.
I think, my experience, I've been playing video games my entire life, and like the music starts with the start menu. It's like,
Mhm.
it's
and
odd.
doesn't stop. Yeah.
It's odd if you experience something that doesn't have music from the very beginning. And I think the where and when, you know, the music shows up, let's say, is, the first time I experienced that, I was uh I felt pretty lucky to be working with a team that could kind of come up with that, and to think that, like, you don't necessarily need or would maybe want music to be there at all times. So that way, the absence of it is powerful, and then the addition of it is even more powerful. And
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
it I think has an enormous role to play in terms of getting inside the player's head when the player doesn't say a word.
Mhm.
Like, you feel like you're sitting with these emotions, and they're coming and going almost at random, which I think is just a sign of how well designed the music is in the game. It's like, it's not entirely clear what, even now when I play through, like, when the music will show up and when it will kind of go away is
Yeah.
still kind of, it gives me goosebumps a little bit. So
Yeah, Tyler's
um,
Tyler's super adept at playing with contrast, both
Mhm.
contrast within the music and contrast when like music versus not music, in a way that very much becomes part of the storytelling. Uh, yeah, and that's all I'll say. It's extremely effective.
yeah.
So I think with that, we can start to wrap things up. I guess anything else regarding the design or development of Pine that we didn't discuss that either you would like to bring up?
I
The
would.
one
Okay, Najati, go ahead.
one thing that we touched on earlier that I thought might be interesting to both, the uh, more design oriented players and any game designers that play it is in looking at the environments, the way that the environments came together. And specifically, we're talking about like a more painterly background
Mhm.
style for the environment. The original idea was that each scene would have its own like hand painted, fairly abstract, but like its own bespoke environment behind it. Um, and quickly we realized that that would be impractical just with the size of our team. So Tom alluded to the 3D world, that is kind of the setting for our characters. And even though it is a 3D world, we put a lot of effort into trying to not make it look like one. So it's a bunch of environmental sprite assets placed in a 3D space, but we gave it our best shot to make it look like the environments, is still pretty clearly things in a 3D space, but try to give them a very like illustrated, painted feel. Um, and that ended up being like one of the bigger technical challenges of the game as well, just because that's not something you're typically supposed to do in a 3D engine. But really wanted to have a reusable like 3D world to set our game up in without it looking boxy and very geometric, but still wanting to have like a pretty significant sense of scale to the game. So just for people who are like looking at how it's put together, and some of the design decisions that went into it, that was um one of the bigger challenges, and I think maybe one of the more unique things that Pine does technically is this world that's like very lush with layered sprites, but is still 3D and tries to look 2D.
And I think the last thing that I would add is, it's not lost on us that it's a pretty rare privilege to have a story like Pine and a game like Pine, and have not just a talented team of artists and musicians, and then a very thoughtful and courageous publisher behind you. So I would say to anyone out there who is developing a game, who has the opportunity to work with anyone who's willing to go down that road with you, I would just say try and take stock of that on a regular basis if you can, because it can be really tough to be, to have an idea that feels like a big risk, and to have, people on board with you and feel like you're kind of like steering them towards something that's a very unclear goal. I feel like a lot of people who end up making games probably end up making them because they want to make a living from it, and then they want to keep making more games. And that's not to say that Najati and I don't want the same thing, but from the very start, even Najati being willing to take on this idea, with me, was quite an honor, and one that I think, it's important to remind yourself of, to kind of fill your tank. It's hard to kind of keep powering through things, especially when games take longer than you think that they might. And you have to be your own cheerleader. So I just think that, like, anyone who's doing this, we see you and we know how hard it is, and but it can be an incredible experience, when you really kind of take a step back and look at it. So it's sometimes pretty hard to see when you're in it and you're so close to it. So I would just try and tell everyone out there who is making games, and students, just go easy on yourself. So
Sure. Yeah. Um, I don't think paying attention to financially viable, like the financial viability of your project, is bad advice. Like there are Pine only exists out of like the sheer generosity and dedication of a lot of people. And our hope is that it's financially successful so that we can keep on doing it, and we're not Pine but continue developing games. But a lot of people involved, from our family to all of our Kickstarter backers to the animators we're working with, and definitely fellow traveler. It's clear that everybody involved sort of like sees the value of the concept like itself, kind of independent of any financial viability. And that's a huge generous gift from all of them, and we definitely are. We're just trying to do as right by all of that generosity as possible. So yeah, the next one's going to be like a looter shooter with a bunch of like it's going to be, the next game is going to be pay to win.
Yeah.
But it's also it's going to be a game about grief, but it's just going to be pay to win Pine.
Fight grief by opening up these gacha banners and these loot boxes.
These loot boxes. Yeah. Is your happiness in this loot box? No.
Yeah.
That's the perfect tagline right there.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess as kind of like to like talk about, like, have you to consider, or have you been thinking of another project after Pine?
Yeah, we knew what we've known what our third game is before we started work on our first game. Yeah. So we've got another project that we're super excited about getting started on. It's going to be like a huge genre shift from Pine, but it's an idea that we've been playing around with for a while that we're really excited about. And everybody we've shown like the very early prototype and like concept sketches of has been like, that's good. That'd be fun. You should make that game. We're like, yeah, we will.
All right. And I guess with that, like, for people listening to us right now, we are recording this just at the beginning of June. Is there an estimated release date, or like any estimated idea for when Pine will be released?
I think Fellow Traveler has said 2024, and that's what our goal is. Yeah, as soon as this interview is over, I'm going to get right back to it so we can keep to that.
All right. So I guess with that, for either of you, any final thoughts? Anything you would like to say to the fans to kind of take us out on?
Just thank you. I think we're we've just felt very lucky this whole time, and we will continue to say thank you to the point where it maybe sounds a little obnoxious, but hopefully never not genuine. We are excited to finally share the game with everyone who's followed along, and for people who maybe not, who don't know anything about it. And I think I'm also just extending that thank you to Najati, just because like it's not very often that you get to team up with someone who you sync up with so well in terms of your ideas, and just to be able to make stuff together is really kind of a thrill. And so I think trying to just count the blessings as you go. So yeah, I would just say thank you to everyone, our backers, our team, Fellow Traveler. Thank you, Josh, for having us. And yeah, we're looking forward to hearing what everyone thinks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think echoing everything Tom said, of course. I think the gamers who are making this narrative driven space in video games viable are like doing our art form a huge favor, and sort of showing that there is an audience for these like more emotional experiences, and like making like just by virtue of being somebody who buys narrative driven games, you're doing buys and plays narrative-driven games, you're doing a lot to sort of expand the definition of what video games can be. And not to say that narrative-driven games need to like take over the world or whatever, but it's a super important aspect of what the medium can do. And so yeah, I mean it's kind of huge that like that little niche in our industry is already as big as it is, and the opportunities that you're affording developers that want to do this more experimental stuff and like this more narrative story driven stuff is it's huge to developers, it's huge to the industry, and it's like I mean video games are obviously a huge industry, and this sort of like neck of it, there's so much artistry all across games as an industry, but I love this little like artsy boutique sort of like off-kilter corner that has been carved out for these like idiosyncratic and moving experiences, and the audience for them is the only reason any of that exists. So appreciate it, part of that nook, and being able to make something for that niche is really special.
Yep, and like from my own experience, it's been fascinating to see just how much that audience has grown over the 2010s. Again, I remember when like the likes of stuff like Dear Esther and Gone Home came out, and there was that majority of people were like, "This isn't a video game. All you do is just walk around and you listen to people talk, and where are the loot boxes and the gotcha
where's the
banners?"
jump button? Yeah.
And like especially like with this past little Narracon that I cover, like there was a huge variety of games, and it is great to see like there is that healthy market for games that can be focused on telling a story or being more of a story-driven experience rather than just being completely kind of like self-service to the gameplay itself. And again, like people watching know that I am the gameplay first kind of guy. Like that's kind of like what I do with a lot of the stuff, but it is very healthy to see that variety of games out there and that there is an audience willing to support it.
For sure. Yeah, and just the last note, not to contradict something that we said earlier, I would also say if you are a game dev and you have an idea for a thing like this, like don't shy away from just making it for the sake of making it. Like, there are people that spend 12 hours a week playing guitar by themselves in their bedroom just because they love playing guitar, and that's a completely valid artistic endeavor. Like you don't need a publisher to make something that's worthwhile. Like if you've got a story to tell, just like tell it, and you don't have to have a publisher to be a successful game maker. It helps pay the bills, but there are lots of extremely talented guitar players that don't get paid to play guitar. I would love to see game development be more okay like that, like just an expressive medium that people can get into.
Ditto.
All right, well, Tom and Najati, thank you so much for hanging out this afternoon. In terms of like social media, anything you want to mention, stuff like that, anything where people can find you, go right ahead.
Tom has an Instagram feed, and other than that, we're absolutely terrible at it.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, we Made Up Games does have a Twitter account. I think there might be a post on there. I would say this my publisher will want me to say wishlist Pine. That would be amazing and huge for us right now. Other than that, just tune into the Fellow Traveler stuff. Fellow Traveler has an amazing Discord. And they've got an active Twitter. And I'm happy to send anybody who might be interested in Pine to the Fellow Traveler Discord and Twitter.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think for anything regarding what Najati and I are working on for Pine specifically, it's going to probably best be communicated through Fellow Traveler, and so I won't mention other social media platforms because they're more of a mix of other stuff. So let's stick with the publisher we're very lucky to have.
All right, well, I think that is going to take us out for tonight. So again, thank you both for coming on, and definitely best of luck with getting Pine out. And I'll definitely be looking forward to see what you guys have cooking next.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having us,
Thank you.
Josh.
Thank you for having us.
Not a problem. So, for everyone tuning in, thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the YouTubing stuff, we have a Discord and a Patreon as well. Buy all the copies of my books as well that you see fit. It will help. It may help you with your own grief, but we'll have a rule on that later. But guys, thank you again for hanging out. And yeah, if you're free in the future or want to talk about whatever your next project may be, definitely reach out. I'll be happy to have you back.
Appreciate it, Josh. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Josh.
All right. So, everyone, thank you once again for tuning in, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where you examine the art and science of games.